In 1969, Terry Kath stood at the center of a band selling millions of records in just a few short years. As the lead guitarist and soulful voice of Chicago, he powered a sound that fused rock, jazz, and brass into something entirely new. His playing was so commanding that Jimi Hendrix famously called him the best guitarist in the universe. From 1964, 1966, Chicago's rise was explosive. Between 1970, 1973, multiple albums went platinum, and relentless touring pushed the band to the top tier of American rock. But behind the numbers, cracks formed: alcohol, cocaine, depression, and a growing sense of alienation as the band shifted direction in the mid-1970 seconds. Then, on the 23rd of January, 1978, at just 31 years old, one casual sentence, "It's not loaded," ended everything. This wasn't just an accident. It was a collapse years in the making. 1964, 1966. Explosive fame, an image out of control. 1964 marked the formation of Chicago, then the Chicago Transit Authority, with Terry Kath immediately emerging as its raw creative engine. Kath wasn't just the lead guitarist. He was the band's emotional voltage, a powerful singer with deep soul inflections, and a guitarist unafraid of distortion in a jazz-influenced setting. Early live shows around Chicago and Los Angeles built a reputation for volume, risk, and intensity. Sets regularly stretched past expectations, with long improvisations and unpredictable dynamics. By 1966, industry attention grew fast, but so did pressure. Rehearsals tightened, touring schedules expanded, and the band's identity began to harden around commercial expectations. Kath thrived musically in chaos, but struggled personally with structure. Friends later recalled heavy drinking beginning early, not as excess, but as self-regulation. His image became difficult to manage. Mood swings before and after shows, resistance to polished presentation, a growing distrust of industry handlers. What the audience saw as fearlessness was also the first sign of impulsivity without brakes, a trait that fueled the music while quietly endangering the man behind it. By the end of 1966, Chicago was accelerating toward national success. Terry Kath was accelerating towards something far less stable. 1970, 1973. Success measured in numbers, pressure measured in silence. Between 1970 and 1973, Terry Kath was operating inside one of the most commercially powerful bands in America. Chicago released new material almost every year, while touring for 200+ nights annually, often crossing the United States multiple times within a single cycle. By this point, the band had sold tens of millions of records worldwide, with several releases reaching multi-platinum status within months, not years. Concert venues expanded from theatres to arenas, with average audiences jumping from 2,000, 3,000 to 15,000, 20,000 per night. Financially, the machine was flawless. Creatively, it was relentless. Studio sessions became compressed, deadlines fixed, experimentation rationed. Kath's guitar parts, once open-ended and volatile, were increasingly framed to fit radio length and broadcast clarity. The music succeeded, the system tightened. Offstage, the numbers told a different story. Alcohol consumption increased as touring intensified. Cocaine became more frequent, not recreationally, but functionally, used to stay alert, then shut down, then repeat. Sleep cycles fractured, relationships thinned. Kath began carrying a quiet sense of displacement, despite being central to the sound. The paradox was brutal. The higher the chart positions climbed, the smaller his personal space became. Applause grew louder, control grew firmer. By 1973, Chicago was bigger than ever. Terry Kath was still inside it, but no longer steering it. 1,974, 1,977, still on stage, no longer in control. By 1974, Terry Kath was still standing on arena stages, but the centre of gravity had shifted. Chicago remained a commercial force, selling millions of units per release and maintaining a touring schedule that hovered around 150, 180 shows a year. The revenue stayed high. The machinery stayed efficient. The spotlight, however, moved elsewhere. Creative decisions became increasingly centralised. Song structures shortened. Guitar passages were trimmed to seconds rather than minutes. Where Kath once drove long-form improvisation, his contributions were now measured, timed, contained. Radio demanded consistency. Management demanded predictability. The margins for risk narrowed. Off-stage, the numbers turned darker. Alcohol use escalated from nightly drinking to near-daily dependence. Cocaine use followed the touring cycle up before shows, down afterward, creating a loop that rarely broke. Friends later described stretches of 48 to 72 hours without proper sleep, followed by long emotional crashes. Rehearsal attendance became inconsistent. Mood swings grew more pronounced. By 1976, the contrast was unmistakable. Chicago's brand was expanding, but Kath's personal authority inside the band was shrinking. He was still present on stage, still capable of brilliance, but increasingly isolated in decision-making. The applause continued. The internal disconnect widened. In these final years, nothing collapsed publicly. No scandal forced a stop. No headline warned of what was coming. The system kept moving forward while Terry Kath quietly fell out of sync with the life that had once revolved around him. The 23rd of January, 1978, the moment everything stopped. On the night of the 23rd of January, 1978, at a residence in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles, Terry Kath was 31 years old. The band had just completed another cycle of touring. Equipment was stored. Schedules were briefly clear. There was no performance that night, no crowd, no countdown. Just a room, a conversation, and a handgun. Witnesses later recalled the gun had been handled casually. The assumption was simple: unloaded. Seconds mattered. A single trigger pull followed a sentence meant to reassure, "It's not loaded, it was." The shot struck at close range. Emergency services were called immediately, but the damage was catastrophic. Death was pronounced shortly after arrival at the hospital. Time from discharge to impact, moments. Time from impact to irreversible loss, minutes. The official ruling was accidental death by gunshot wound. No suicide note, no evidence of intent. Yet the data around the moment told a larger story. Alcohol was present, fatigue was chronic. Judgment had been impaired by years of chemical dependence and emotional erosion. This was not a random anomaly. It was the final point on a long downward curve. The aftermath was immediate and absolute. Chicago cancelled activities. Recording plans froze. A founding member was gone without warning. No farewell tour, no final statement. Just a sudden absence where a central force had always stood. The night ended quietly. History did not. One careless second closed a career built over 14 relentless years and exposed how fragile the line between survival and collapse had already become. After 1978, the band continued, the core did not. After 1978, Chicago moved forward out of necessity. Tours resumed, records were released, commercial momentum returned within a few years. But the internal balance never fully recovered. Terry Kath had been more than a guitarist. He was the band's risk factor, its raw edge. Without him, the sound became safer, more controlled, more radio-oriented. Sales remained strong, but the early experimental identity faded. The numbers still worked. The spirit that created them did not. Legacy, silence, and the question that remains. Decades later, Terry Kath is remembered less by charts than by those who listen closely. His death was labelled an accident. His legacy was not. The question remains, did Terry Kath disappear too early, or was he already being erased while still alive?